Welcome to the Self Seeker channel. Today we have my new friend Neil Gehani, and I haven't actually met Neil in person, but I got introduced to him online on LinkedIn, and he has expressed interest in presenting at my upcoming conference, Using Plants as Medicine, happening March 22nd to the 25th in Brisbane. So Neil will be presenting for us virtually. Um, Neil has been interested in mental health and well-being for quite a while, and he has primarily worked in the consulting space and has founded or been a founding Sherpa, as he likes to call it, of Mindlumen. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Nikhil. It's a pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. So, even I don't know a lot about you, so I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself, and then I would have some questions to ask you following that.
So I'm a kid that grew up in India. I was sent to a military boarding school at the age of 4.5. My parents put me on a plane and handed me off to a flight attendant. I don't even know who was with me at the time. My uncle picked me up at the airport in Mumbai and put me on a train, and somebody at the other in the train station picked me up in Pune, and that's where I went to school. All I can remember is I was young and I was crying on the train station. So that's the memory that I have. And I stayed in the military school for 9 months out of a year from the time I was 4.5 till the time I graduated high school when I was 15. My parents lived in the Middle East. I worked there for a little bit, summer jobs, and then I moved to US to get my college degree. So I landed in the US at the age of 16 in the Midwest. I went to engineering school, got a degree in engineering with a minor in CS, and also got my MBA, and then moved out to California and worked in the tech Silicon Valley space for the last 20 plus years, working in engineering and product management, which is where my career is, and mostly building software, tech tools for other tech people, as I like to say. And now I'm using the tech tools and platform and my skills and knowledge to build a platform, a digital platform for mental health and well-being services.
Wow, that's quite impressive. You were in the thick of it.
Yeah, yes, I would say was pretty much deep into it. So yeah, it's even though I was very successful externally, people will look at it and go, yeah, you're super successful. You've got a career. You've been a 2x founder, 3x head of product. You make a lot of money. You have a house, and now I don't have the house anymore in San Francisco. And I was married and all that kind of stuff, and everybody thought, oh wow, you're super successful. But somehow it just didn't feel fulfilling to me as to what I was doing. And like 2015 was kind of the time frame that I realized something is off, and I don't feel like I don't understand what I'm doing with my life, and whether my life has any meaning or purpose at all. And it didn't at that time. So I think that's kind of started the questioning period for.
I see. And how caught up were you in the vicious cycle of earning and spending and looking after what society expects us to follow and do? How much of it were you into it?
Oh yeah, I was knee deep into it. I was sucked in to the whole measure, quote unquote, measure of success. And being Indian also, the measure of success is, wealth. And that's sort of the climbing the ladder, the wealth accumulation, um, was really the identifying factor. Like that's what was my identity. That's how I defined my identity. That's how I defined who I was, not as a human being or a person, but as what material goods I could potentially have access to, by earning a huge salary and chasing ladders, a career ladder, and chasing more and more money, and chasing more and more happiness, and my happiness was tied to how much I could attain. And when I attained it, then I would say, oh yeah, I'm going to be happy if I attain this. And then when I got there, going, well, then I need to chase having something else because I'm not happy now. So I've got to go chase something else, then I'll be happy. Oh, then I got that. Oh, I'm not happy now, so I got to chase something else to be. So happiness became a chase,
Mhm.
rather than what I now call a state of bliss. Like a state of bliss, you have moments of joy and you have moments of sadness, but you can accept both, and you are in a state of flow. And that flow is much more beautiful and it's much more sustainable over a much longer period of time. And I've been in a state of bliss now, off and on, for several years now. And it's been, yes, I've had moments of depression for sure, but I'm able to manage them, very well, and come out of them, and be in a state of flow. So, and particularly the last 6 months or so, I've been in a wonderful state of bliss, and it's been absolutely fantastic. So I've changed my outlook completely, and it wouldn't have happened without psychedelics.
I guess that was my follow-up question. Did psychedelics have a part in bringing you to this state that you're in today?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and a huge part. And I'm, like I'm a conservative. My family's conservative. Everybody told us, "Oh, yeah, drugs are bad. Drugs are bad." And I grew up with that. I grew up with all of the "Say No to Drugs" campaign in the '80s when I was living here. Um, it's it's what we've been told, and the information that's been provided is limited because of the control of information by the CIA and the government, even in the '70s. If you look back at history, it was nothing wrong with people taking LSD and psychedelics at all. It had everything to do with incarcerating people of color. So they wanted to create a drug war, and we spent literally, billions and billions of dollars on a drug war, and we are not no better for it. We have an opiate crisis. We had a fentanyl crisis. Now we have another a fentanyl-like crisis, which is there's a new drug now invented by the cartels because people are trying to cut down on fentanyl use. So now there's an even more dangerous and more powerful and more addicting substance that is available on the illegal market, right? So this prohibition mentality didn't work for alcohol, which is still the most dangerous substance known to, in terms of harm causing to ourselves and to others, relative to classic plant-based psychedelics. And yet we seem to, make this make this plant-based substance illegal. I mean, for me, once I realized, I started reading the information. I mean, it starts from more of a personal journey. So I would say that I didn't come to psychedelics, you know, like just randomly. It actually started in 2015, and it was a very gradual process. It was a process by which I first learned that somebody told me, like, you should get up on stage and just tell your story about coming to the US as a 16-year-old Indian, right? That's how it started. And I never told a personal story. I mean, I told, one-on-one to other people, but somebody said, you should get up on stage and tell this story. And I said, I was scared to do it. I've gotten up on stage as a product manager and spoken at hundreds of conferences, and I'm very comfortable speaking on stage. So I don't have any stage fright in terms of presentation, things like that. But this was the first time I was scared in my life to actually tell a very personal story. And now that personal story lives on YouTube because it was done as a storytelling competition, and it's recorded and people can listen to it, and it's available there. And that was the first breakthrough, really, the ability for me to just able to express something that's personal, right? That was like a mini step that I took in 2015. And then it wasn't until 2017 that I had my first psychedelic experience. So it was 2 years later. I was at a music festival, and somebody gave me something. I was among friends. I didn't even know what it was. I just trusted the people that I was with, and I took this medicine, and it just opened my whole mind up to things that I had never thought was possible. I was basically a 5-year-old in an adult body, and I loved it because I never got to be a 5-year-old. I was thrown into military school and I was told to grow up. So I grew up, very quickly. I adapted. And that's my skill. I adapt. I've been doing that all my life. But I never got a chance to be just a child, just explore. So this was the first time I was actually just exploring the music, the lights, the landscape that I was in, the people that I was with. it just allowed me to explore those things for the first time in my life. It wasn't until 2 weeks later after the festival that I found out what it was when I asked somebody. And they said, "Oh, you took sassafras." And I said, "Oh, what the hell is sassafras?" I had to look it up, and it's MDA. And I said, "Oh, excellent." Then I started reading stuff about it. I discovered the site Arrowhead. I started learning all about the different types of substances there. I discovered the Shulgin's material. I started reading that. I discovered medical research on all the research that was being done on psilocybin and MDMA. I discovered MAPS organization. Then I came across Michael Pollan's book. I was reading that. I absorbed every material that I could find because my logical brain kicked back in saying, "Oh, you're an engineer, so go research, figure out what the hell this stuff is." And that's what I did. And then I was traveling Colombia in 2018, and I was reading Michael Pollan's book at the time, How to Change Your Mind, and I almost ended up doing an ayahuasca ceremony. So I'd scheduled and planned to do one, but the shaman never showed, so it never really happened. So I wasn't sure whether I was fortunate or unfortunate that this didn't happen, but it gave me the time to actually reflect on what I was trying to understand. Michael Pollan's a good book. The problem with that is that when he goes into explaining things, you can logically understand it, but you cannot really experience it. And you don't know what that actually feels like to you as a human. So I can read this on paper and it makes sense logically because I'm an engineer. Okay, I understand it. Logically, this stuff makes sense. And I so spoke to my logical brain, but it didn't speak to my emotional brain. It didn't speak to my heart, it didn't speak to my gut. And so I started to think about how to do this because he was talking about doing it with a guide. And so that was the impetus for me to search for someone, because I was still a cautious person in the end. I still wanted to do this as safely as possible. And that's when I started my quest, like after 2017, to see who I could find to actually help me. And it took me 3 years to find somebody to help me. I didn't find a therapist until early 2020. And that's the first time I went into therapy, let alone, therapy with the substance. And initially we didn't start with the substance. We just started with therapy. And that was completely new to me to begin with. So I don't know what made me sort of even go down that path, but it just seemed to open up the door so that I could go down this path. But I felt like after coming out of those experiences, I felt like it shouldn't take 3 years for somebody to find the help that they need. And after my experiences with psychedelics with her, starting with MDMA first, then MDMA plus psilocybin or mushrooms, all, and then pure mushrooms. In June of 2021, I did 7 grams of mushrooms, and the doors freaking just completely blew open. I wanted to do this a lot earlier in 2020, but my mom died in 2020, so I had to deal with a lot of that. And it was in June of 2021 where the trauma, all of that trauma and all that grieving came to fore. And I cried for 4.5 hours. I was breathing so heavy, my therapist was putting her hand on my chest to make sure that I was okay. I was completely fine, but it was just such a wrenching and emotionally draining experience. But it was not only was it very painful and sad, but it was also the most joyous, the most beautiful, that's the first time for the first time I felt really felt my mom's pain. This is the first time I've really felt it. She had been telling me stories when I was a kid, and I kind of completely ignored it as a kid because, okay, that's great, but because you can't quite relate to what my mom's experience was. But this is the first time that I was able to relate to her in a very deep and personal way because I was her. I was her in a refugee camp watching her mom die in that experience. I could feel it. I could literally feel her pain. But I could also feel her love. I could feel ecstasy. I could feel joy. I could feel bliss. I could feel all of those emotions for the first time in my life. That's the first time I felt it all. That's what changed. That June 2021 was a pivotal point. 3 months later, Mindlumen was born. The idea of Mindlumen was born. It was still an idea,
Yeah.
and that's how it happened.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. So I'm curious about Mind Lumen. Could you tell us a little more about what you aim to do, what you have been doing with Mind Lumen so far?
Yeah, we've been slowly trying to create a project. We haven't formed an entity yet. We will form an entity shortly. We had to wait to form an entity because I didn't want to start one right away. We wanted to sort of test and beta test a lot of things. So we've been in beta testing for a while now. Um, the idea of Mindlumen is twofold. We have two goals. One is to ensure that there's no friction in people that are seeking help, therapeutic help with psychedelic plant medicine, right? We want to remove the friction for every seeker that comes to us. So it shouldn't take them 3 years, and they should be able to find the most ethical and reputable people to help them facilitate their journeys, right? That's goal number one. Goal number two is to be the audit and accounting watchdog for the entire psychedelic space. So we'll sort of become the Michelin star guide system of the entire psychedelic space. So we created a unique, and both of those goals can be met by creating what we call an ethical reputation score, which is a numerical score that's applied, that's taking practical and applied ethics and applying it to all the facilitators, the retreats, the clinics, the training programs, um, basically everyone who's a provider in the mental health space. You know, whether you're a well-being provider, whether you're a sound healing provider, whether you claim to be a shaman, um, whether you claim to be a healer, doesn't really matter. The goal is to make sure that people are getting connected. It's a matching service. And it's a harm reduction matching service. Actually, I would call it a risk reduction matching service because you cannot eliminate harm, and sometimes you can't even reduce the harm. So we reduce the risk in terms of matching people, seekers, to facilitators and journey spaces and retreats, clinics, etc. That's what it's a three-sided marketplace platform. You can think about it as sort of ClassPass meets Airbnb.
And does this organization have a geographical location?
It's going to be established in the U.S. As an entity, both a nonprofit and a public benefit corp. So it's going to be a hybrid entity, um, and it will be registered there, but it will operate globally.
Wonderful. Wow. And you do not live in the US currently.
Live in the U.S. I live. That was my home in San Francisco. I now live in.
Oh, nice. Okay. Um, you mentioned reflection, which I find to be very interesting. I feel that when we are caught up with work and family and responsibilities, we don't get time to reflect on things, on ourselves, on our journey, on our accomplishments. But when you take psychedelics, it gives you that space and time to reflect. Have you found that to be true?
Yes, it's the first time if it wasn't for psychedelics, I wouldn't have started writing in journals. I filled 5 volumes already in 2 years of writing, and a lot of my journal is reflection. It's thinking about how I was as a person and how I want to be as a person, and who do I want to be? Why do I want to be that person? Just reflecting on what I was doing then versus what I'm doing now is very, very different. And the person that I was 5, 6, 7 years ago and the person that I'm now is completely different. And even if you ask my friends, even my friends came up to me, a year or two ago and said, "You've changed a lot in the last couple of years," you know, and without prompting, you know. And I think what I can describe myself as like I've become much more at peace with myself, with my faults, with my inadequacies, you know, but I've also lost confidence in certain areas and gained confidence in other areas. And I am trying to find a happy, blissful balance between my professional life and my personal life. My personal life has blossomed. It really has blossomed. My personal life, I was married, and the reason I said it was a traumatic day yesterday is because the divorce was finally final last night, and it was a 2 year long arduous process, a very painful process. But I realized that I bear no ill will and no anger. Like all the anger is sort of gone within me. I haven't felt angry in I don't know I don't know how long now. You know, I don't have hate.
Wow.
Um, I don't have these sort of strong, unpleasant feelings. I've never expressed, I would get annoyed, right? I would get pissed off and I would get annoyed and I'd get angry and I would yell and scream. I should do that quite frequently. And the littlest thing would trigger me. The littlest annoyance would trigger me. I didn't have a lot of patience. Patience was not a thing for me. Um, and now I seem to have infinite patience, and I don't get angry, and I don't have outbursts of anger. Um, it's not, and I've been working on not just not expressing it, which is what I was able to do pretty early on in my psychedelic journey. But now I'm working on not even to feel that, like, and even if I do feel it, like kind of just accept it. It's like, oh yeah, okay, why am I feeling this anger? And it's tap into myself more to understand it. And generally that calms me down right away, and I don't feel it. I don't have the sense of bitterness towards people, even those people have harmed me and betrayed my trust and have manipulated, or I've been manipulated by them. And I let that happen. It's what I allowed to happen. I didn't have good boundaries. I now have very good boundaries. So I know what those are now. But I can reflect on those things and say this is how I've changed in my life going forward. And I like this person because it feels more real and more genuine to me. I don't have to hide who I am. I can just be me for the first time in my life and just be okay with it, with all my problems and all my faults. And I'm not a perfect human. I never will be. And it's I tell people that my life is like an infinite layer, an infinite onion layer. Every time I peel one, there's a new layer to peel, and it will be a lifelong journey of peeling more and more layers of the onion, and the journey, the process is actually enjoyable. I'm not looking for some end goal where I'm going to get to some core thing. I'm enjoying the moments to moments as these layers unfold or unravel. And I'm enjoying the discovery of who I am. And that's a lifelong discovery.
Where I stand, it appears that you found your inner calm, which has come from you being able to understand yourself, your environment, your people, which is why none of it triggers you or angers you because you understand things. Maybe more than before. I'm not saying you wouldn't have understood things before, but I feel psychedelics makes it also easy to understand ourselves.
Yeah. I think that's the key. I think psychedelics is a way to discover ourselves. And if we don't discover ourselves, we really cannot understand the world around us or be in relationship or in harmony with the rest of the world around us. Because we externalize those things because we haven't discovered how to handle it ourselves. So we express anger, get mad at people, and people get mad at it, reading the news and all of that. There's a lot of horrific things going on in the world, right? But there's a way you could be a 30-second commercial and always respond, and you could be the news and just go to the next headline in your life, or you could sort of absorb it gently and be aware of it and accept it and just live the moment for the moment, and because the moment is going to pass, right? I mean, this is part of the Vipassana training that I also went to, is and Vipassana was super useful for me to integrate my psychedelic experiences. Like after my mushroom experience, I went to a 10-day Vipassana retreat. It's the best time to integrate. I could meditate and reflect on those things. And I think that taught me a lot, that the meditation training from Vipassana, they go hand in hand. Psychedelics and meditation kind of go hand in hand. You could do either one. I like came out of my Vipassana training because you're not allowed to read or write or listen to anything and not make eye contact, etc. But right after my Vipassana journey, I ended up drawing a chart in my journal that showed that meditation is a nice, easy glide up. It'll just take a long time. You can get there through meditation, but psychedelics is like a step function increase,
Mm.
go up, and they both, and if you the flat part of the stairs, if you do meditation, that's the integration portion of your psychedelic journey. So, intention setting and then going the journey and then doing the integration work, and meditation is kind of used, journaling is used as meditation work to integrate your psychedelic experiences. And that's super useful because otherwise you just spend a whole bunch of money and haven't taken anything. No lessons have been learned. And even if you learn the lessons, if you don't apply them to your life, then
Yes.
what have you really done? And that to me is what I try to help people understand, because I do a lot of education and policy work as well. So I try to help people understand that. So when seekers come to me, I'm trying to explain to them, like, you do it with respect, you do it with reverence, you do it with intention, and that's where you get the biggest benefits. Um, no objection to people doing it recreation. You can do that. I advise you on how to do it properly and how to do it safely and things like that. I have no problem with that. I do it. But it is not where the benefits come. The benefits comes from doing therapeutically and doing it with intention and doing it with respect.
Why do you think there's a need for that at this point in time?
Oh my God, there is just people suffering needlessly, dealing with their own emotional traumas all over the world. There's 8.1 plus billion people on this planet. Majority of them, by the way, are Asians, you know. Yet most of the studies and the language that people use is Western medicine language, right? It's one of the reasons that I started the Asian Bay Area Asian Psychedelic Society, is to get Asians together in person, right? And in-person communications, in-person connections are the best freaking thing to build relationships. So many of us, particularly us of Asian descent, we bury all of our emotions inside of us. We don't express it. We don't hug. We don't say things that, but doesn't mean we don't feel it. But we don't know, we don't even recognize that feeling. We think, oh, whatever is wrong, yeah, let's just suck it up and go about your career. Like I was, even during my separation, I was dating a wonderful Chinese woman, and she grew up in China, and even though she had these emotions, she couldn't express it. She was afraid to express it because she felt like vulnerability was a weakness, you know, and it isn't. Vulnerability is actually a strength. You know, when you're comfortable with your own emotions, you're not afraid to be who you are, and you're not afraid to love. You're not afraid to get hurt. You know, but you will be able to experience the best fullness of life, and that I think is an amazing feeling. And a lot of people, every one of us, majority of the people suffer through emotional trauma as part of their life, through their childhood, through their parents, inheritance from their parents. It gets passed down from generation to generation. We hold those traumas in us. You know, it's built up. It's built up around our families and how we're expected to live in this world. But we have no outlet to deal with it. And if we decide that there's an outlet to deal with it, we have to be defined or diagnosed as mentally, quote, ill, in order for us to deal with our own emotional trauma. So we can go to drink alcohol. We sort of numb our pain by drinking alcohol, or people will smoke cigarettes, or people will do weed, or people will do hard substances, heroin and cocaine and all of that kind of stuff too. Most of them are addictive, you know. So people will do that. That is as old as time. People have had to deal with issues, and people deal with those issues any which way possible. In the olden times, they would have used, in ancient times, they would have used, um, you know, weed, and they would have used mushrooms, and they would have used plant medicine. I mean, it goes back into Asian and, Indian culture centuries. It goes back in Chinese history. Nobody talks about it, but it's, plant medicine has been used in Thailand, in Buddhist culture for a long, long time. This is not new, you know, but just because it's not been pharmaceuticalized, in some pill, some magic pill that the pharmacy wants to sell us, we don't believe it, you know. And most of, like I said, 80% of the world's population who want to access self healing caring for themselves and become a better human, become a better version of themselves, don't need to be diagnosed by anyone. Doesn't need any gatekeeping.
Mm.
You know, you don't need a doctor. You don't. Now, for some people, yes, I'm not saying that medicine or pharmaceutical medicine or clinical medicine is not a good thing because it's great for physical pain. Like for physical health, great. I've broken bones. Vicodin and morphine really helped me. It calmed the pain down, so I could do physical therapy. Um, but that system applying to mental health is completely broken. Right? They've taken the physical health model and tried to push it into the mental health world, and it's like a square peg in a round hole situation. You know, and other than severe cases like schizophrenia and bipolar one, most people aren't, you know, don't need a doctor, don't need a diagnosis, you know, and we have created a whole bunch of diagnoses in the DSM-5, psychiatric manual, labeling them because we needed to provide pharmaceuticals to a labeled quote unquote disease or problem because the medical industry works as a problem solution model. You have to have a problem in order for me to provide you a prescription or fix you in some way. It's a fixing mentality, right? And it's not a experiential mentality. Psychedelics, plant-based medicines is a life experience mentality. If you can learn how to live a wonderful and blissful life like I'm living right now, then you learn to live with a lot of things in life. All the externalities you can deal with. Your relationships are better. Making love is better. Uh, you know, there's lots of things that are better as a result of doing this. And you don't need any. I didn't need a doctor to tell me
Yeah.
that something was quote wrong with me.
Yeah.
You know, my sister was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. She was given a whole bunch of pharmaceuticals, many different types of drugs. She was gone for 6 months. I couldn't reach her. Literally couldn't reach her. She would be in bed. She couldn't get up. That's how bad it was. That's on farm.
Yeah.
My wife's nephew, he was on a bunch of pharma stuff. He was in and out of mental hospitals. Right? I know people that take 7 pills, each to deal with the side effects of the previous one. Right? They don't want to, but that's what they've been told. They've been told something is wrong with them. Oh, you have ADHD. Oh, you have PTSD. Or you have anxiety. You have depression. Yes, those things exist, but they're part of life too. The question is, how do you manage that as part of your life?
Mm.
I deal with ADHD. I've dealt with my own depression, my own anxiety, right? But I've dealt with them with my medicine.
Mm.
That's the most beautiful thing. I wasn't going to trust any pharmaceutical because of what happened to my sister and what I see, in my wife's nephew and people that I know. So there's no way that I was going to go down that route. And so this allowed me and guess what? It's awesome. It's completely safe, you know. It's safe if you find the right person. Like, there's lots of charlatans out there too claiming to be shamans. So you have to be careful about that. There's a lot of sexual abuse that happens
Yeah.
in the psychedelic underground, but it also happens in the above ground. So this notion
Yes.
that policy people that, oh yeah, if you make it legal, it's more safe. It's safe and accessible if you make it legal, right? That's just not true. There was a recent New York Times articles. There were doctors accused of sexual abuse. These are licensed professionals. So how is that quote safe? And
Yeah.
just because it's legal doesn't make it
Yeah.
accessible either. In fact, it makes it more expensive. So it's less accessible.
Mm.
So criminalizing psychedelics,
Yeah.
you're making it more unsafe for everyone because you're creating a market, an underground market, whereby people have no recourse. It's not that the use of substances underground is bad. Actually, it's quite safe. The use of I use it underground. It's actually quite safe. The challenge is that if something bad happens underground, just like something bad happens above ground, The only difference is that in underground, you treat the person like a criminal, the person who took it, who's trying to get help for themselves. And that's just wrong from a policy perspective. They just don't have any recourse. That's the fundamental difference. That's it.
Yeah.
And so people who want to take care of themselves aren't criminals.
Agreed. So, what would be, according to you, the best way moving forward?
I think the from a policy prescription perspective, the better approach is both the legalized and the decriminalized model. You need a legalized model for people that are suffering from schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. You need a clinical route, right? And so I'm not saying that there should be no clinical route. You need that. But for 80 to 90% of the world who wants to access this, there should be a decriminalized route. And that's the bulk of it, right? So you need both of these models to exist. And with the legalized model, it's pretty clear. People have been trying to do that in Colorado and Oregon, and but most of the places in the world, it's a decriminalized model. Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, all over Latin America, 23 counties in the US. All of them are on decriminalized routes. They started with decriminalization. They started with deprioritization first, then decriminalization, then legalization. And that's a good order, right? That's a workable order. That's how cannabis started. Started with deprioritization first, decriminalization, then legalization. And so the same thing is going to happen with psychedelics, just at a much faster pace. It's happening at a much quicker because of the research, there's a lot of medical research now showing the tremendous benefits of psychedelics, for people with PTSD and anxiety and end of life cases and so on. People are the young people are not stupid. They can read all this information coming out. So you can't hide, government can't hide this anymore. CIA can't, misinterpret the information and feed us their version of it, right? Like they did in the 60s and 70s. They can't do that now. People have access to honest information. Research material is available. There's a lot more people that have access to it now. So people know that it's pretty safe. And so no amount of criminalization is ever going to stop people from using it. It's like prostitution. It's the oldest profession in the book. You are not going to stop prostitution, period. It's been around as long as mankind and humankind has been around. Same with use. It's been around as long as human is around. People are going to use it. All you're doing is making it more unsafe by criminalizing it. That's what people are doing. So the policymakers and the people in education should understand you're just making it more unsafe. You're killing more people by making it criminalized.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's what you're doing. And so understand clearly why you're doing that and what you're doing, because you're making more. That means people who get sexually abused, you're creating a trauma for them because they have no recourse to report it to because you've designated them as a criminal. The person who's victimized, you have re-victimized them again.
Yeah.
They went to plant medicine because they wanted to deal with their trauma.
Yeah.
Right? And then they deal with the trauma, and then they have added trauma because of one person, one charlatan, one shaman who can be a bad apple. There's bad apples in the legalized world as well. There's going to be bad apples everywhere. You can't wait. That's why I say you can't eliminate harm. So don't try to legislate elimination of harm to zero. Don't try to legislate risk to zero. There's no such thing as zero risk in life. Everything in life is risky, right? You can try to reduce the risk. And that's what we try to do, is to reduce the risk so that people can have access to these medicines with safety and ethics at the core of what we are. And we want them to be connected to ethical and reputable people because it's people at the end of the day, and we are flawed humans.
We are flawed but perfect and beautiful humans.
Yeah.
And I love to see how passionate you are about this topic. So, you talked about working with ethical people. So, I'm just curious, who or what kind of people do you work with? Like, what are their professions, or where are they coming from?
They come from all over. Some people come from their own personal experiences with this. Some people have a social work background. Some people are teachers. Some people are previous psychologists or even current psychologists, who have licensed and work underground. They're psychiatrists. They are, trained by a peer peer support counseling, they're counselors, they're coaches, they're all kinds of people that come to this work, right? Most of it, the common thread is that they all come to it with the people to people mindset. You know, they are there primarily, there to sort of support, they're caring people, right? So now the question is, anybody can claim to be caring, right? The question is, how do you vet them? Like, how do you ensure? So we can't go, we're not the world's policeman. We're not gonna like pre-check or pre-qualify people, say, no, no, you can't be on our platform because you don't check this box or don't check that box, right? It's not like that. What we do is, um, we have an application process. We have facilitators go through the application process, and we go through an interview process. And before a match is consummated, we also do a background check. Okay, so that's sort of the more practical aspects of the vetting process. The more intangible aspects of the vetting process, we want to quantify. So we use ethics as the primary criteria for which we give them a score. And the way we measure ethics, we look at what ethical guidelines they themselves adhere to. They'll tell us, we ask them, what ethical guidelines do you adhere to? Some will say MAPS, some will say Guild of Guys, some will say the APA Society, which is like the Association of Psychologists and Psychiatrists Association. Some people will have the North Star Pledge. Like, there's many different ways. We don't create them. The facilitators themselves have created these. We didn't create them, but we are like I said, the audit and accounting company as well, right? So we're gonna hold them accountable to what they themselves say they want to do.
Right.
So we look at the guidelines, and we will say, let's just take the two guidelines that which a lot of people look at in Europe and the US. There's MAPS within the US, and there's Guild of Guides from the Netherlands, right? Both have very long ethics guidelines. Both are good ethics guidelines, you know. And people say, oh, I kind of look at the MAPS ethics guidelines and that's what I follow. Or somebody say, I have my own ethics. And I say, okay, great. You tell me what that means. If some people say MAPS and other people say Guild of Guides, I will look at both of those ethics guidelines, which is what I do. And I look at which one of those guidelines has more observable and measurable criteria. That's what I look for, right? And I can run this with an AI, so it's actually pretty easy to find. So I can say, okay, so I found that the Guild of Guides actually is a much better ethical guide because it has some clearly observable, measurable things, because we're about practical applied ethics. That's the field we're in. So I will give a higher weight to somebody who says they follow the Guild of Guides ethical guidelines over MAPS. That's where my decision criteria comes in, right? And we publish our philosophy so people can see we base our decisions based on a philosophy. It's out in the open, so people can read it. So I'm not hiding anything. I'm very transparent about it. That's also the reason that I'm not a facilitator myself, because being a facilitator myself means I have a built-in inherent conflict of interest, because I'm trying to recruit patients and clients to myself. So every provider has a built-in inherent conflict of interest because they're trying to recruit patients and customers to themselves. And when you're working in a capitalistic society, guess what? Ethics is the first thing goes out the window. So we are the check in the system, which is also why I purposely I could have gone and become a facilitator and guide, and I do facilitate and guide my friends, but I don't do it professionally. And the reason for that is because I don't want that inherent conflict of interest. I'm not trying to recruit patients and clients for myself, for my own services. I'm not. It's a membership organization. Everyone pays. The seeker pays a membership fee. The facilitator pays a membership fee. The retreat clinic training also pays a membership fee. So everyone pays. If I just charge the facilitators and didn't charge the seekers, I'd be beholden to the facilitators. And that's not my aim. My aim is to be beholden to the seekers because that's who I am. That's where my experience came from. And so I'm going to be beholden to the seekers. And so if I want to remain, unconflicted, if I want to remain unbiased, if I want to remain independent, and if I want to remain trusted by the seekers, this is what I have to do. And that allows me to be trusted by the seekers that are seeking help. And that's the 8+ billion people in this planet, right? And I'm not trying to boil the ocean here. I'm not trying to use even metrics that in a like a SaaS platform that we use metrics like DAUs and MAUs. Those are meaningless here, right? Just having users in the platform is meaningless. Who's being helped? How long, how quickly can they be helped? Those are the metrics that I'm more interested in. And if that means I only help 1,000 people before I die, it's good enough. I've helped 1,000 people before I die, and
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, you know. So it's just a different way of thinking about how I want to go about doing this work. You know,
Hmm.
yes, I live in a capitalistic society. Yes, I need to make a living. I don't have a job. I don't make a living. I haven't gotten any money. I'm basically, living on my savings. Um, and that's why I'm living in Thailand because it's much more affordable than San Francisco.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think like try to create a startup, a typical startup where it's VC funded and so on. That's why I'm creating a nonprofit with a public benefit corp, right? Because it's stakeholder values that are important to me, not just shareholder value. Um,
Mhm.
and so I'm only going to be aligned with investors who want to invest in me if they as a public benefit corp. So it's still a corporation. They still have a return on their investment, but we are going to operate as a stakeholder organization rather than purely a shareholder organization. That's the fundamental difference in how we
Yeah.
are, and that's aligned with our philosophy. That's how we want to operate.
I feel an organization like this that's so focused on practical applied ethics and wants to benefit the public basically would would definitely have a spot in Australia. We would definitely need that because the psychedelic therapy space is growing after psychedelics where some of them were legalized last year. So, which is why we are holding the conference. I was
Yeah.
just wondering if you could tell our viewers what they can expect from your presentation at the conference.
Yeah, so I'm gonna focus on two things. I'm gonna focus obviously on the education and policy side, and discuss that, and also focus on the how you take that and apply it to the practical world of implementing, mind over life organization where ethics becomes the core in a capitalistic system, right? Because we in a capitalistic system like discard ethics the minute it becomes inconvenient. And so we don't want to do that. We want to create a practical way for us to use ethics as the core principle on which we operate. So I'm going to talk about those two aspects of it and how do we make ethics actually practical, observable, measurable. There's a talk that I gave at Oxford University on this very topic, and the fundamental premise of that talk was if you're unethical in business, can you really be ethical in care?
Mm, good point. Wow. So, what would you say to someone who, let's say, comes from an Asian or Indian strict background and upbringing and is brought up on fearing anything that is not coming from the pharmaceutical industry, and they are just too afraid to step into this? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, look to your own culture and look to your own history, right? You India, most Asian countries have a long history with herbal plant medicine use for all kinds of healing purposes. This is no different, and this is way safer. Second, if you want to talk about safety, let's look at the pharmaceutical record on safety, right? Particularly with mental health substances. It is now shown. Today we have data. We didn't have data before because pharmaceutical industry didn't provide us that data. Now we have data that shows that plant medicines are way more efficacious than any current pharmaceutical medicine that's used for mental health. Right? And it's not just a little bit better. It's like significantly better, right?
Mhm.
And it has little to no side effects, plant medicine, and it's not addictive, right? So the stuff that they're currently using, alcohol, which is a recent study was done by the Imperial College of London. Alcohol is the most harm causing substance to you and to others. Whereas psychedelics, compared to like 20 odd, there's a chart without I'm going to show, that shows the psychedelics is the bottom of that list. First of all, it doesn't cause harm to others, and if it does cause harm, it's going to cause harm only to you. So you're the person responsible for taking it. So the first responsibility is on you as a human, which you are responsible for taking care of your own actions anyway. You take alcohol, you're taking a risk, right? But people do it. People know how to do it in moderation, right? People also know how to binge. So you're going to have that problem with that substance. You're going to have that problem with psychedelics too. Nothing's changed there. The difference is that alcohol can actually kill you if you abuse it. Most drugs will kill you if you abuse it.
Yeah.
Psychedelic, classic serotonergic plant-based psychedelics don't kill you, right? They will give you, you take a strong dose of LSD, guess what? You're going to have fun for a very long ride, but you're going to come out of it, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're suffering from bipolar 1 or schizophrenia, then you are at risk of going into psychosis. So I'm not going to tell you that there's no risk here. There's always a risk. So I think the first thing we need to do is educate people very early on, in high school, to let them know, like, look, sex without protection is going to be an issue, but nothing wrong with having sex. It's part of being human.
Yeah.
Psychedelics is really good, but wait till you're 26 when your brain is fully developed. Now, if you're not going to wait till you're 26, do it with therapy, do it with your parent in therapy with a facilitator. There's plenty of people out there that will help you, like a parent and his son. He wanted to come do this. His son is young. His son wanted to try psychedelics. The parent said, okay, because if he didn't allow the son to do it, the son would have gone and done it on his own. But the parent said, okay, I've done it. I'm not going to be hypocritical and tell you not to do it, but I'm going to go with you, to do it. So they had a bonding session with the two of them together, and that's okay because now the parent's taking responsibility for the child, in this case, But if the child in the U.S., if the child can drive a car at 18 years old, which kills more people than psychedelics, by the way, and alcohol, psychedelics doesn't kill people. Even the police lieutenant that I was with when we were going to the California legislator said, hey, I would rather have a person on LSD than a person who's drunk. So the person on LSD is docile.
Yeah.
The alcohol is belligerent. Yeah. So, there's just, it's a lot of it is education. A lot of it is just giving people information, and the young people are pretty smart. They can figure out what's bullshit and what's not.
Yeah.
They'll do it. So I think we got to give them credit where credit is due. They can figure this stuff out if we just expose the information to them in a way that's understandable.
That was amazing. Thank you. I really look forward to meeting you in person one day and also diving a bit deeper into these topics because you clearly have knowledge and wisdom that you gathered from your life experiences that I think needs to be shared with the world. So
Thank you. It's an honor, and that's the quest that I'm on. And that's one of the big things about psychedelics. It's the experiential experience that matters more than a whole bunch of letters behind your name.
Yeah. And I still can't believe that I'm speaking to someone who's come from that logical, technical business space working in Silicon Valley, who now is open to the idea of psychedelics and spreading it with the world. Yeah, that gives me a sort of a relief because I was there once. And it's been hard to find people who feel the same way but come from that same background. But I feel we are similar in that sense. So it's been great connecting with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhil. It's a pleasure.
We shall see you soon at the conference.
Okay, sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.